One of the things that's at work in a concerto when you've got a soloist in front of the orchestra, well, is this. We as people tend to look at this one person in front of the orchestra, and rather than simply a solo player, that person becomes a hero. Psychologically, it's just what happens. We identify with this person, we want him to do well, especially in this case. He's our Sawyer Thompson. But even more than that, just with any soloist, we identify with this person, and that person is doing something heroic. Well, okay, but what is this hero doing? The easiest analogy for us to all to think of is that this person is making a speech. That this soloist is up there, even playing an instrumental piece, is saying something to us. What's he saying? Well, this can be almost anything, of course. But immediately we interpret it as being something kind of stern and serious. Why? Because it's in a minor key. So it's a concerto in B minor. Later on, though, the key changes. We have a contrasting tune in D major, and our soloist, our hero, our speaker, is maybe becoming a little more expansive and generous. So, I think we're listening to somebody making a speech. One of the things I love about Scheherazade is it's a great piece to use to teach people about how to listen to symphonic music. Very often when we listen to music, we're listening to music that has a sung text. We're listening to songs. So we wind up following the words. Listening to simply a piece of instrumental music is actually kind of a hard thing to do, and we're rather unique in Western culture. We're the only people that really do that sort of thing. Most of the time in other cultures, it's vocal music that we're listening to. But here, the challenge of listening to an instrumental piece is sort of taught to us by Rimsky-Korsakov. One thing he does, he has lovely melodies. And all he does is restate those melodies, but does it in different keys, so that it's as though it's sort of organically growing and the lighting is changing. Rather than taking the melody apart, he just restates it in a different key, and very often using different instruments of the orchestra. You get the idea. It's the same thing, but just renewed because he's always changing the key, and so it sounds fresh. Also, he changes the instruments that he uses to play it. So once again, it changes color. The same subject, but in different colors. The piece is called Scheherazade, and it's based on Rimsky-Korsakov's reading of the famous 1001 Arabian Nights and stories from that collection. And to be sure, it starts out with two characters. You've got the misogynistic, kind of creepy Sultan, sounding all grim and threatening, and then you have the plaintive Scheherazade, represented by the solo violin. Sounds really pleading, doesn't it? So right at the outset we get these two characters. And so we sort of think that, okay, it's going to be about Scheherazade telling stories, and we're going to hear music that is about those stories. Actually not. Rimsky-Korsakov sets that up. But then the next thing we hear is music about the sea. And what do we hear? The Sultan's theme floating in the water. So what are we to assume that the Noah story is? That Scheherazade and the Sultan get on a boat and go someplace? No. He sets it up, Rimsky-Korsakov does, sets it up with those two themes, those two characters, but for the rest leaves us to just listen to music that is vaguely oriental, that is vaguely based on these famous stories, that presents images to us, but it's not about telling a story, it's about the music itself. And again, he does this in a very easy way by simply restating those melodies in different keys and using different instruments of the orchestra. In other movements, he'll again set the frame. We'll again get the Sultan's theme and Scheherazade, only that part there he does sort of tell a story that we can follow. But for the rest, he takes off the training wheels and you just are listening to musical ideas performed by the orchestra. It seems like Rimsky-Korsakov is telling at least two stories in the piece Scheherazade. One story is about the relationship between Scheherazade and the Sultan and how Scheherazade saves her life by telling the stories that become the stories of the 1001 Arabian Nights. The other story might be those stories themselves, the Arabian Nights stories, which Rimsky-Korsakov doesn't really play with very much. Gives us titles of the different movements, but we don't know much more about them, and they sort of float in the music. Really, as I said earlier, it's really about the music itself is what we're supposed to be attending to, not trying to make it fit a narrative from those famous stories. The real narrative that's being followed is how Scheherazade saves her life. Second movement opens with the same sort of wily storytelling motif that quickly cuts away to the story of this Kalendar prince. The fourth movement begins with the Sultan's theme sounding even more resolute and angry, stomping around. It's answered by Scheherazade, the solo violin, playing this Scheherazade theme as a solo cadenza and sounding a little more pleading and even finally a little desperate before finally quickly change the subject, get into the story of the festival at Baghdad. Or from there go to the sea and Sinbad's ship again, and the ship shipwrecks, and another image again from the Arabian Nights, not again very developed, but just it's as though we're quickly changing the subject before finally, at the very end of the piece, it ends quietly with the Sultan's theme sounding now calm and resolved, and floating over it is the Scheherazade theme. So the storytelling, Scheherazade saves her life, all ends happily, and we're just left with wonderful music that sort of has something to do with these exotic tales.